Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I want to talk about revision, and I want to more specifically talk about some deeper understandings that can help you apply this revision technique to your manifestation process. I want to cover how to do revision, and I also want to talk a little bit more about some unexpected benefits you may notice or experience when and if you start incorporating revision into your manifestation process. So, with all of that being said, let's get straight into it. What is revision? Revision is a Neville Goddard technique for reshaping your reality by consciously altering your perception and memory of past events. It's based off of the idea that your present moment is a byproduct of how you perceive the past. And it's very much rooted in the understanding that time is not linear and that the past is not fixed. Our memories are very malleable and can be reshaped through conscious effort. This shift in perception can have a very profound impact on our present and future projections, mainly because our subconscious mind operates based off of the beliefs and memories that we hold. And there's so many things that we can gain from using revision. We can heal past traumas, we can change limiting beliefs. We can also manifest desired outcomes by using revision. Now, if this idea of changing the past is a little bit too out there for you, I want to talk about some fundamental understandings that may help you embrace this idea of revision more. The first being the understanding that we're actually shifting through parallel realities in every single present moment. When we really start to understand this idea that time is not linear, what ends up happening is we become more aware and conscious of the fact that we're actually only ever experiencing right now. When we look at time from a linear perspective, the way that our linear mind sees reality is very much like a line, a linear experience, with the past being first, the present being in the middle, and the future being third or last, we could say. But when we take a step back and understand things from a more energetic perspective, what is actually happening in this idea or this realm of time is that we're only ever experiencing right now. Because we're only ever experiencing right now, what this means for past events is that they don't exist. The only place that they actually exist is in our imagination. So a way to understand the past is through this perspective of seeing them as imaginal acts rather than truths or experiences that are set in stone. Another thing to understand when it comes to revision is this idea that we're actually revising all of the time, even though we may not be consciously aware of it or consciously doing it. Scientists have done a lot of study on this idea of memory recall, and what they found is that it's actually not necessarily memory recall. In fact, what they discovered is that memory recall is more like memory reconstruction. Every time we recall a memory, we're not simply just playing back a recording of what happened. Instead, what we're doing is we're actually reconstructing it piece by piece. And what our brains do is fill in the gaps with assumptions and biases and sometimes misinformation to complete that memory or to reconstruct that memory. Again, usually very unconsciously. This is not something that we're always aware of doing. Another thing to understand when it comes to this memory recall is that our memories can actually be influenced by our current emotions, our current beliefs, and even suggestions from other people. This not only means that memory is malleable, but it also means that our recollections of events can change over time, even without us realizing it. The thing to take away from this is the understanding that every time you take a memory out of storage and remember it, you're actually not just remembering it, you're actually modifying it in that moment of remembering it. Again, whether you're consciously aware of it or not. And this kind of reconstruction can be a very subtle reconstruction of the memory, or it can be a more dramatic one, which can depend on a lot of different things. By seeing memory from these foundational understandings can help you start to understand how powerful revision can actually be. And it can also serve as an excellent platform to start applying revision to your manifestation process. Because we now understand that we're reconstructing memory every time we remember a memory, what we can start to do is start to consciously reconstruct the memory in a way that allows for a more favorable and desired outcome from that memory. So with all of this being said, how do you actually apply revision? The way that I go about revision is, first, I identify a past event with an undesired outcome. And I've done revision personally for past events, like some in my childhood. And I've also done more, we could say, like immediate past events, like revising something that someone said to hear them saying what I wanted them to say instead. It doesn't really matter what memory you want to revise. The idea, though, is to pick the one that left you feeling a little bit off, or the result that came from the conversation or the experience was unfavorable to you in some way. The second thing that I like to do when it comes to revision is I actually like to remind myself of all of those understandings I mentioned earlier in the video about understanding and reminding myself that memory is just an imaginal act. The only thing that exists is here and now, this present moment. The past isn't as real as I think it is. And I also remind myself that I'm doing this memory change every single time I recall a memory. So I might as well do it in a way that favors me rather than works against me. After reminding myself of those understandings of revision and what's actually happening, the third thing that I do is I reimagine the event the way that I wish it had gone. Now, when it comes to this step, there's actually a very specific way you want to go about this, because one thing that you don't want to do is try to convince your linear mind of something that did not happen. When it comes to your linear mind was only designed to ever experience right here and right now. It was only designed to really experience what happened and what is currently happening. It's the very thing that's keeping you grounded in physical reality, and it's the very thing that's giving you the linear experience. It's not out to get you or anything. It's just there to help you experience things, to keep things organized, to keep things safe, we could even say. And where a lot of people, myself included, can sometimes go wrong with revision is trying to convince their linear mind of something that just did not happen. If you try and convince your linear mind of something that didn't happen, what you're going to find is that you're going to get a lot of kickback from it. Meaning that every time you imagine this new scene and try and make yourself think like, yes, this is the thing that happened, it was so magical and it was amazing. Every time you try and make yourself believe that or force the feeling, you're going to find that your linear mind's going to kind of like jump in there and be like, it didn't actually happen that way. Nope, you're incorrect. Like that's not what really happened, and you can't really convince me that it did happen that way. So it's very important to understand that when you're doing this revision, this art of revision, that you're not coming at it from this need or this pressure to convince your linear mind of something that didn't actually happen. Rather, the way you want to go and remember or reconstruct the memory is through the art of consideration. I talk about this idea of how to feel it real in one of my other videos. I'll link it above if you're curious to watch it. But in that video, I talk about the way to feel it real is actually not by imagining something and trying to force a feeling onto yourself or trying to conjure a feeling. Rather, the way to instruct your mind to feel it real is actually through the act of considering something. So if you want to feel something real, anything real, the words that actually help you consider something are actually modal verbs like would, could, should. Those modal verbs are the things that serve as conditionals. And when you give your brain a question in the form of a consideration, what that serves as is instructions for your brain to activate your imagination, essentially. So think about it. Every time you consider anything, whether it's what you want to eat for lunch or dinner, or what you would like to do tomorrow, anytime you use the words would, could, or should, you're actually in consideration mode. And so when you go about anything, whether it's feeling your imaginal act real or when you are revising something, you want to make sure that you're coming at it from a conditional standpoint. And so what I do specifically for revision is I do a lot of considering. And even more specifically, I do a lot of considering with the modal verb would. So in my mind, in my imagination, I will ask myself, well, what would have happened if the desired outcome had happened this way? Or what would have happened if this person said this thing? What would it have been like if this reality or this experience played out in this way? What would it have been like if this conversation had gone this way? What would it have been like if this person did this? And by using that modal verb would and exploring the woulds of this imaginal act, what it does is it naturally evokes my imagination to start considering the new image, the new memory. And the idea with this type of consideration, again, is to activate your imagination into feeling it real or dwelling in that imaginal act or that new memory over and over again without the pressure or the intention that your linear mind needs to believe that it actually happened in the past. It's very similar to how to create a knowing. Again, this is another video I created about not trying to believe that something will definitely happen. Instead, you want to persist in possibility. It's very similar to that, except this time it's about not pressuring your mind to believe in the certainty that this new imaginal act or this new memory actually happened. When we persist in certainty, we can get a lot of kickback from our linear mind simply because it was not designed to experience anything other than here and now. If you try and force it to believe something that physically was not true for you, it's going to give you kickback. It's going to do its job and tell you, no, that's not what happened. You are in this is what actually happened in physical reality. And so the way around that is by learning how to activate your imagination via consideration to the point where you are saturated in the state of the wish fulfilled without trying to convince yourself that this thing actually happened. It's through the saturation and the dwelling in that new state over and over again that actually creates the new memory. The main point I want to make with number 3 is just be careful that you're not trying to convince yourself of something that didn't happen, because you'll just get more kickback from your linear mind. And it's not because your linear mind is out to get you, it's because your linear mind's doing its job of keeping you grounded in physical reality. Rather, the way to actually practice revision is through conditionals. Would, could, and should. Specifically would for revision. What would have this been like if this had happened? What would this have been like if the conversation went this way? What would it have been like if I had experienced that memory in this way? When you revisit that memory through the conditional of would over and over again, what this ends up creating in you is the dwelling experience, where you become saturated with this new memory, this new state of what happened. And the idea is that every time your mind shifts back to that memory or to that experience, you want to make sure that you're selecting the new memory with the conditional would rather than the old memory. And again, with that repetition of the new memory, it creates the sensation, the experience of dwelling in that new memory. That dwelling is going to be the very thing that shifts your reality, because what you're actually doing is you're changing your present moment, your present state of being, by seeing the past differently. That present moment shift is the very thing that will help you shift timelines in a more dramatic fashion to a reality where there's more favorable differences than the reality that you were currently at with the old memory. And last but not least, I actually mentioned this already, but the 4th step is to dwell in that new memory. So every time you have the option to revisit the memory, you're going to basically have 2 options. You're going to have the option of the old memory or the option of the new memory. Make sure that you are revisiting the new memory every single time. And again, not from the perspective of trying to convince your mind or convince your linear mind that that new memory is what actually happened. Rather, you are revisiting the new memory through a conditional, and more specifically, the conditional would. What would it have been like? That question of what would it have been like will be the very thing that activates your imagination and gives you the state that you are looking for. And learning how to repeat that cycle over and over will give you the experience of dwelling in the new state, and therefore allow you to shift to a new and more favorable timeline where your past is actually more favorable and your future projection is also more favorable. The last thing I want to say when it comes to revision is, if you're someone who's not really sold on revision, or if you're someone who doesn't really feel called to, revise your past or even revisit your past because you feel like you can just kind of like keep it in the past, you can just focus on the present moment and continue forward because, the past, doesn't exist, whatnot. I want to offer you some unexpected things that happened to me or that I realized when I started incorporating revision into my manifestation practice that honestly kind of like took me by surprise and really helped me expand my consciousness to a level of understanding of just being like, wow, time really is not linear. And our perception of the past is actually influencing our present moment more than we realize. One of the first things that I experienced when I started practicing revision was actually this feeling and this sensation of peace in my present moment, which sounds a little bit weird because I personally never really saw my past as something that affected me too much. Even though I may have had some unexpected and unfavorable things happen in my past, even some things that some people could say traumatic experiences, even though I had those experiences, I never really felt like they affected me in any way because I wasn't dwelling on them still. But when I really started revising certain things from my past, the first thing that I became immediately aware of was this feeling of like inner peace in my present moment. And although that doesn't really sound like as exciting as like getting your manifestation or something like that, it really had a profound impact on my life. In fact, it actually made me realize how much of the past affects our present moment. And becoming aware of all these memories that I would bring up in my present moment and like revising them, even down to like the smallest unfavorable memory, in by doing that, I realized how much our perception of the past really influences our present moment. And the biggest way that it really hit me was just through that feeling of peace. The only way that I can explain it is like it felt like I was taking my foot off of a brake that I didn't even realize I had my foot on until after I started practicing revision. It was just very eye opening to see and actually experience how much of our past really influences our present moment. And not only that, but also it was pretty eye opening to understand and see how much of our mind uses our past to calculate what's going to happen in the future. When our linear mind thinks of time, again, it's from the perspective of past, present, future, very much like a line rather than just kind of seeing it as this whole bubble of just right now. And because our linear mind sees reality from that very narrow perspective of past, present, future, what it does to calculate the probabilities of our future is it will look at our past and take the experiences of our past so that it can make calculations and expectations of what our future is going to look like based off of what our past was. So when you go back and you revise the past, what you actually allow yourself to do is you basically give yourself like a leg up on calculating more favorable outcomes in the future from a linear perspective, because now you have a more favorable past so that your mind can take the experiences in the revised act and use them to calculate a more favorable future or prediction or expectation of what your future is going to look like. Another thing you're going to realize when you start practicing and incorporating revision into your manifestation process is that there's actually a lot more potential for ease when it comes to going for what you want in the future. And you'll become more aware of and actually feel this idea that circumstances really are completely irrelevant, especially when you can go back and modify that circumstance in your imagination so that you can get on a more favorable timeline and future projection. And all of those benefits I mentioned when it comes to revisions are, like I said, they're not really talked about that much, at least that they weren't like the forefront of the stories that I would hear about. But those are just like the start of what you can start to experience when it comes to utilizing revision in your manifestation process. And all of those benefits aren't even including the manifestations, like the physical manifestations that you can manifest from revising your past. When I first came across the idea of revision, I didn't necessarily like disagree with it. I actually, again, it very much resonated with me, but I didn't actually start practicing revision until a little bit later. And when I say it's actually like game changing, I mean, it's one of those like techniques that like I understand now why Neville was so adamant about it and why he very much said that if he taught nothing else, he would teach revision. Revision really can take your manifesting to the next level. So I would highly recommend trying it out because it can heal a lot of things that you may not even be aware of within your system. And it can also serve as a way of incorporating more ease and relaxation and peace into not only your current reality, but also your future manifestations. So definitely try out revision if you feel called to. I would highly recommend it, but revision was definitely one of those techniques that took my manifesting to a new level. It was pretty profound when I started applying revision in my everyday manifestation process. All right. But I'm going to end the video here. Definitely let me know what you think about the video in the comments below. As always, I love hearing everyone's different perspectives. Also, please share any revision success stories in the comments below as well. I love reading revision success stories. I think they are one of the coolest things to really start to incorporate into our everyday experiences. But I would love to hear yours if you have any success stories with revision. But besides that, that's all for now. Until next time, keep creating, everyone, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.